Gregory Fleniken, for all intents and purposes, was a hard-working American man. Growing up as the chief engineer on ocean-going vessels, he spent much time at sea. Later in life, he spent more time on land, working for gas and oil companies in South Texas. Eventually, Greg would go into business with his brother Michael, leasing land to oil companies. This led to Greg having a fairly predictable schedule, every Monday morning driving from Lafayette, Louisiana, to a hotel just outside of Beaumont. No stranger to travel, Greg entered room 348, set his suitcase down as a makeshift drawer, sprawled his clothes around the room next to his brown leather boots, and, as on most evenings on the road, relaxed in his hotel room with a snack and a movie. His wife, who was still home in Lafayette, emailed him on the evening of September 15, 2010, regarding a tax extension she was filing. At the end of the conversation, he wrote to her, "You're doing good, babe." It would be the last contact she would have with her husband. The next morning, after calls from Greg's wife, concern from his coworkers after he didn't show up for work, the Beaumont police arrived at the hotel, and with the manager's assistance opened room 348. What they find shocks them all. The room was undisturbed, everything exactly as it had been the night before, all except for Greg Fleniken, who was doubled over on the carpet of the hotel room, dead, cigarette still in hand, his skin grayish blue, devoid of life. Upon further investigation by Detective Scott Apple, it was determined that the death was a natural causes thing. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of a break-in or forced entry. His clothes and luggage still remained where they were, undisturbed. Nothing was missing. Greg's wallet was still in his back pocket and contained the $100 bills he had previously. Visitors staying in rooms nearby claimed to have heard nothing. No drugs found in his luggage or on his person. On the surface, there was little doubt that Greg's less than stellar lifestyle and choices led to his premature but natural demise. According to his wife and his brother Michael, he did not eat particularly healthy. He didn't exercise. He drank when he wanted and chain-smoked for most of his life. Despite the shock and tragedy of the situation, Greg's sudden death was not an enormously hard pill to swallow. The only question that remained now, in the eyes of the investigators, was what exactly caused his final moments. A medical question, nothing more. The post-mortem exam conducted by, at the time, Jefferson County Medical Examiner Dr. Tommy Brown started off as a fairly typical affair. Circumstances around Greg's death seemed fairly straightforward, the only superficial damage seen initially being an abrasion on his cheek, presumably from when he hit the rug at the time of his death. Upon further examination, however, Dr. Brown discovered a laceration on Greg's scrotum. Upon examining even further, he noted that the sac was swollen, discolored, was surrounded by edema fluid, and bruised. The bruising spreading up Greg's thighs near his hips. Immediately, Dr. Brown identified this as hard, blunt force trauma. Things only became stranger as Brown examined the inside of the torso and discovered extensive internal damage, including lacerations on his stomach and liver, 2 broken ribs, and a hole in the right atrium of his heart. Dr. Brown concluded that the damage sustained by Greg's body was consistent with a brutal beating, or perhaps crushing. Brown hypothesized that perhaps Greg was kicked hard in the genitals, which is where the tear and bruising came from. And then afterwards, perhaps he was hit so hard in the chest by his attackers, it caused lethal damage. And while the initial hypothesis of Dr. Brown seemed to make little sense, his conclusion was clear. Greg Fleniken didn't die of natural causes at all. This was a homicide. Dr. Tommy Brown concluded that Greg Fleniken was the victim of a homicide, and even more so, a savage beating that caused massive internal damage. Now the question remained, what were the events surrounding his death? In the weeks and months following Brown's conclusion that Greg was beaten to death, Detective Apple relentlessly attempted to recreate and solve the murder. But no matter how many leads, no matter how much research, how many interviews, still, nothing added up. How was Greg beaten so severely and yet had no external damage? Why did it take a post-mortem to uncover evidence of blunt force trauma? Why was his body positioned in the way that it was? Why was there no evidence of a struggle or forced entry? None of it made any sense. Along the same lines were the whys of the matter, which was also a dead end. Greg, for all that they knew from researching and interviewing, was a nice guy. Loved by his wife Susie and his brother Michael. Appreciated and liked by his company. Even his time at the Elegante Hotel, where he spent his final night, was inconspicuous. He would check in the morning, leave for work, and return in the evening, where he would relax in his hotel room for the night, before leaving once again for work early in the morning. No one had ever reported seeing Greg at a bar, and he did not drink heavily or get involved with trying to pick up women. He did not have a history of drug addiction or drug distribution. No one he owed money to that would come back for vengeance, and no known enemies. It seemed like Greg was a hard-working, stand-up guy who got along with pretty much everyone. And yet, he was killed, savagely beaten in his hotel room, without a trace. Eventually, Detective Apple's tenacity paid off. Records indicated that on the evening of his death, Greg contacted maintenance of the hotel due to a blown circuit breaker that was a result of him microwaving popcorn. This little, seemingly insignificant detail led to Apple creating two distinct theories about Greg's death. The first revolved around the maintenance man, who was previously convicted of sexual assault. Perhaps he had been the one to attack Greg, which would probably explain the lacerations on his scrotum. However, this still wouldn't explain the lack of any external injuries, the room being untouched, or the way the body was found by investigators. The second theory involved a group of union workers, electricians, who had been staying at the Elegante Hotel that night as well. Perhaps they confronted Greg and beat him to death in a drunken rage. But once again, with this theory, too much was left unexplained. After interviewing the electricians who were there that night, none of them provided any useful information pertaining to Greg's untimely demise. Apple's investigation came to a standstill. There was simply no theory that was backed up fully by the evidence. As the trail leading toward the killer grew cold, it seemed as if the untimely and brutal death of Greg Fleniken would remain unsolved. Ken Brennan was a former Long Island police officer and DEA special agent. Leaving that life behind, he left the busy New York City area to be a private detective in Florida. Brennan had quite the reputation as being an effective investigator, even landing himself in the news when he solved a difficult cold case in 2005, sparking the article, "The Case of the Vanishing Blonde." It was this notoriety which landed him on the radar of Leah Sherman, lawyer and friend of Susie Fleniken. Desperate for answers, Susie contacted Brendan on a sunny Florida day. He shortly agreed to take on the case after Susie sent him the files. feeling there were still yet many avenues to explore in uncovering what became of Greg that evening in September 2010. Ken Brennan visited Lafayette shortly after accepting the case, first visiting Susie and asking her all sorts of questions surrounding her and her relationship with Greg. He then asks her if there was anything about the crime scene that seemed off to her. She mentions, above all else, that it seemed odd to her how hot the room was, as Greg would typically crank up the AC. Brennan notes this. Afterwards, he makes his way to Beaumont to meet with Detective Apple. They discuss the circumstances of the case, with Brennan reassuring Apple that he fully intends on being upfront and honest with him regarding the investigation, and insists that they work as a team and share fully with each other all information uncovered. Ken Brennan later discloses that this meeting with Detective Apple was more than just pleasantries and gathering information. It was vetting. Brennan says to a reporter from Vanity Fair, "I don't work with somebody I don't like." The two men agree, and the nearly closed case of the death of Greg Fleniken starts up again. Now working together, Brennan and Apple begin going through old evidence with fresh eyes. The first place to start, the very hotel room where Greg Fleniken was found dead. The two men comb through the evidence, crime scene photos, speculative recreations of what happened that night, and old transcripts of interviews. With all the information out in the open, Brennan states, "I think I know how this guy died. I think I know when he died. I think I know who killed him, and I think I know how we're gonna catch him. Hear me out. I'll tell you what I think, but first I gotta call this guy's wife." On the phone with Susie Fleniken, Brennan confirmed which of Greg's hands was his dominant hand, as well as which hand he typically held his cigarette in. His right hand, she confirmed. Quickly, Brennan began to explain the conclusions he was making with his now partner Detective Apple. When the breaker blew that evening, the AC was shut off. The maintenance man came to fix it. The maintenance man left the room around 8:30 p.m., when Greg was still alive and well. Chances are, due to the high temperature in Beaumont, Texas in September, it would have only taken a few minutes for Greg to notice it was getting hot and turn on the AC. He never did, meaning he died shortly after 8:30 p.m. The fact that he had a cigarette in his hand removed the theory that he was beaten at a different location and brought back to the room. The likelihood that the killer would have the state of mind to carefully put an already lit cigarette into Greg's hand and meticulously arrange him the way he was found was more than unlikely. The fact that the cigarette was found in his non-dominant hand suggests that he had transferred the cigarette from his right to his left hand, as he attempted to reach for the doorknob. The way Greg's body was found indicated to Brennan that he had been calmly relaxing in the moments leading to his death, and whatever caused his final moments came as a surprise. This eventually led Brennan once again to the union electricians who were staying in room 349, whose room was likely affected by the blown breaker caused by Greg. He speculated that perhaps the men were drunk, confronted Greg, and kicked him to death in the doorway of his hotel room, simply leaving him there. Detective Apple mentions that he had interviewed the electricians, Trent Pisano, Thomas Elkins, Scott Hamilton, Tim Steinmetz, and Lance Mueller. They had been helpful, and even left their contact information should the police need to talk to them again. Tabling this for now, Ken Brennan's next stop was Dr. Tommy Brown. Dr. Brown confirmed that the damage done to Greg Fleniken's scrotum could have been caused by a kick, perhaps by an assailant wearing a steel-toed boot, similar to one an electrician or other contractor or construction worker would wear. Now, with a new perspective and a new theory in need of evidence and validation, Brennan asked Detective Apple to interview men who had worked with those union electricians, while he looked at the security camera footage. The footage wasn't anything particularly helpful, simply showing the comings and goings of people and workers and staff up and down the hallways. He saw staff members come and go, some of the electricians making various trips out to the truck, but nothing earth-shattering. Apple and Brennan began interviewing the men who worked in and around the Elegante, even men who knew of men who worked at the Elegante. Not surprisingly, many of them were familiar with what happened in room 348 around 8 months ago. One of the crew foremen by the name of Aaron Bork mentioned hearing something about a gun going off in one of the hotel rooms. No, corrected Detective Apple. That's not the same case. This was the one where a man got in a fight at the Elegante Hotel. Aaron Bork said he wasn't familiar. After the interview with Bork had concluded, Brennan stated, "We need to go back to the hotel. We're going to look for a bullet." Back in room 348, Apple and Brennan tore the room apart looking for a bullet, or any indication of one. They searched along the walls, along the floor, behind every piece of furniture and hotel art. Every crevice and crack of the room didn't escape their search. Brennan now convinced after their conversation with Bork that a gun was somehow involved. But they found nothing. Until they noticed a small indentation in the wall near the closed door that separated room 348 from the adjoining room 349. It appeared to be a repair job, something typical of hotel room wear and tear. However, the knob and the dent didn't quite match. After examining it for a moment, Brennan decided that they should take a look at the other side. After security gives them access, the two men find what they were looking for: a small hole that appeared to be sealed with toothpaste, at the same height as the indentation on the opposite wall in the other room. An unmistakable bullet hole. A bullet had gone from room 349 to 348. Calling in more investigators to take the scene apart further and examine the trajectory, it appeared that the angle of the bullet based on the two holes was aimed right at the area where Greg Fleniken had been sitting that night. Brennan finally had the evidence to substantiate the theory that he had held in his head since talking to Aaron Bork. He said, "This mother was shot." He had examined the body head to toe. He had searched every inch of the body for indications of trauma or foul play. He had opened the torso and found the internal injuries, noted the lacerations on the scrotum. He had been the one that confirmed Greg Fleniken had been a victim of homicide, not natural causes, as the investigators initially assumed. And now here they were, Detective Scott Apple and private investigator Ken Brennan, telling him he had missed a bullet wound, of all things. Brennan knew that in order to pursue the theory, and eventually bring Greg's killer to justice, they needed Dr. Tommy Brown to rewrite his analysis of the body. Brennan and Apple explained to Dr. Brown their discovery. Brown, unable to believe he had missed a bullet wound, told them, "You're trying to tell me that this man was shot, and I'm telling you he wasn't shot. He refused to have the body exhumed, a tiresome and complicated process, and one that wasn't even possible in this case, since Greg's body had been cremated." In a last-ditch attempt to get Brown to redo his analysis, Brennan convinced him to sit with them and go through the photographs taken during the postmortem. Walking him through his reasoning, Brennan would ask Brown countless questions, pointing out various things in the photos. "What's this damage here? What about this here?" Until they finally reached the damage to Greg's scrotum, what investigators previously thought was caused by a kick to the groin. Brennan theorized that the bullet entered the scrotum and caused damage to his internal organs, the skin around the entry wound being more pliable and folding over, making it more difficult to determine it was caused by a bullet. Brennan asked, "Doc, could all of this damage have been done besides blunt force trauma? Could a bullet do the same?" "Yes, it could," Brown replied, "but that's not what happened here." Going through more and more photographs of the body, the men noticed what appeared to be a bullet track. Brown, still sticking to his original analysis, said that the track could also appear if an individual was beaten. Finally, they reached the hole in his aorta. Initially, Brown stuck to his original assessment once again. The hole was caused by a massive beating. Brennan looked at him and said, "Doc, that's a bullet hole." Dr. Tommy Brown looked at it again. "Yeah," he said. "That's a bullet hole. The media is going to kill me on this." With the pieces beginning to fall into place, private investigator Ken Brennan and Detective Scott Apple had only one more place to go, back to the union electricians who were staying in room 349, primarily Lance Mueller, Tim Steinmetz, and Trent Pisano. So 8 months after a man was found dead in the Elegante Hotel in Beaumont, Texas, Brennan and Apple went to question Tim Steinmetz one final time. It had been a surprise for Tim, to be plain. It felt like so much time had passed since the man next door died, and now 2 investigators were coming all the way to Wisconsin from Beaumont to question him once again. Immediately, he conferred with Lance Mueller via phone conversation to ensure that their stories matched up, as they would surely be talking to him next. Convinced that the interview with the investigators would go by just fine, Tim Steinmetz met with Ken Brennan and Detective Scott Apple at the Chippewa County Sheriff's Office. They asked him questions about that night, walking him through the evening, asking him for details. Steinmetz was as helpful and as forthcoming as he could be. He didn't, however, volunteer any information or knowledge about a gun. And Brennan did not press the subject, just quietly taking in what Tim was saying about the events of that evening, all while Detective Apple wrote it up. Once Tim Steinmetz was done giving his statement, Brennan asked him to read the transcript version of what he said out loud, and to let them know if there were any changes that need to be made. Tim read it through, pointed out some minor changes, and the statement was notarized right then and there by a local police officer. This is when the demeanors of Apple and Brennan changed. "You just made a false police report," they told Tim. "We know what happened. Do you want to go to jail with Lance? Tell us what really happened." Now, Tim Steinmetz was getting nervous. This was not what he expected. Detective Apple said, "Tim, we know what happened. We know everything that happened down there. And I realize you're trying to be noble and protect a friend. But you're about to get your whole family in a bind, and it's not worth it. It's not worth it." "So just tell us what happened," Brennan added. And that was when Tim Steinmetz broke and told them everything that happened in room 348 on the night of Greg Fleniken's murder at the Elegante Hotel.
A judge has sentenced a man for manslaughter following a fatal shooting in a room at the MCM Elegante Hotel in Beaumont.
Lance Mueller, Tim Steinmetz, and Trent Pisano retired to room 349 on September 15, 2010, after a day of work. The 3 men, among others, were union electricians working a job in Beaumont. As with many others after a long day's work, the men began drinking before they entered the hotel room that night. After entering room 349, the 3 men, drunk off beer, lazily sat around, the effects of the alcohol already beginning to become apparent. But the evening was still young, and there was more drink to be had. "Hey," Lance Mueller said to Pisano, "go get the bottle of whiskey out of my truck." As Pisano was leaving the room, Mueller added, "Grab my 9mm too." Lance Mueller kept the Ruger 9mm pistol in his truck along with a bottle of whiskey, both of which Trent Pisano retrieved and brought back to room 239. When he returned with both requested items, Mueller, who was heavily intoxicated at this point, began playing around with the gun, waving and pointing at the three men, who ducked on the ground in fear. Mueller drunkenly pointed the 9mm handgun in Pisano's direction, and without warning, the gun went off. Pisano, who initially thought he had been shot, turned around to see a hole in the wall behind him. Mueller, in a panic, brought the gun back to the car. Shortly after, Pisano left the room and Mueller and Steinmetz went to the bar, seemingly unaware that the bullet that had been fired had struck Greg Fleniken in room 348, killing him. The next morning, they saw Greg Fleniken's body being wheeled out of the hotel on a gurney. Steinmetz told Brennan and Apple everything. He held nothing back. Shortly after telling them the whole story, he dialed Mueller with Brennan and Apple recording the whole thing. He notified Mueller that he had told them everything, and advised that Mueller do the same. Mueller, who was still in denial over the gunshot having anything to do with the murder in room 348, began panicking. Later on, after once again becoming intoxicated, Mueller calls Brennan, ready to make a statement. Brennan advises him that he should contact his lawyer. The judge sentences Lance Mueller to 10 years in prison. His actions, drunkenly messing around with a loaded firearm in a public place, the Elegante Hotel, discharging the weapon, almost killing his friend, and actually killing Greg Fleniken, and then fixing the hole with toothpaste and pretending the whole thing didn't happen, painted a picture of a dangerous individual who, even if it wasn't intentional, was responsible for manslaughter. Shortly after this, Mueller and his attorney attempted a plea deal. In addition, they were fighting releasing the murder weapon, Lance's 9mm Ruger handgun. Charged with anger during a meeting with the DA, the lawyer, the prosecutor, Susie Fleniken, Detective Apple, and another investigator, Brennan remembers his emotionally charged speech to the room, saying, "The victim was important to everybody here, and we're not going to let this thing be brushed under the rug. Let somebody take a plea on this. This is not a fucking accident. An accident is when somebody comes in, has taken off their gun discharges, and God forbid somebody is hit. That's one thing. It's completely different when somebody fucking brings a gun that they shouldn't have into another fucking state, shit-faced drunk, fucking around with a gun. The people with him realize that something bad could happen. He discharges a round, almost kills the guy he's with. He doesn't even bother to knock on the door to see if anybody's hurt. And after that, his answer to the whole thing is to go get drunk some more in the fucking bar of the hotel. And then when he sees a body being taken out the next day, and he is 100% certain he killed somebody, he decides not to say anything about it, but run to his attorney and leave the fucking weapon in a safe. And the fucking attorney doesn't say anything about it either? You know what that is? That's fucking murder. Lance Mueller was sentenced to a 10-year prison sentence by a judge. But before he was put away, Susie Fleniken was able to confront her husband's killer for the first time. She says, "I have waited over 2 years to look you in the face, eye to eye, and simply have the chance to speak directly to you. You would never have come forward with the truth. You murdered him. No, you didn't intentionally seek him out to murder him. But you murdered him. With every lie you told, with every intentional self-deception, with every cover-up over and over again. You saw his body taken out of the room in a body bag. In her final statement to her husband's murderer, Susie Fleniken said across the crowded courtroom, "You have met your match. I would have spent the rest of my life tracking you down. And I found you. Greg's murderer. I brought you to justice."
Justice was served. I got to finally address my thoughts to this man who, had he simply come forward, this would have been a completely different, quote, accident. And unfortunately, when you don't make moral decisions, it causes other people, both of our families, including his. I saw after speaking to his father a little while ago that everybody has been through much torment and pain.
Thank you guys for watching this re-edited, remastered video. This was one of the first true crime videos that I ever released. It was in 2019 or 2020. And when I first released it, it was kind of just all black screen with some pictures and audio playing. Since then, I'd like to think my video editing has gotten a little bit better, so I wanted to go back, re-edit it, remaster the audio a little, take some of the pauses out where I could. There's music playing in the background, so I couldn't do it everywhere. But I hope you guys enjoy this. This was cool to revisit, one of my first true crime videos, and I still am pretty proud of the work that went into this. So hope you enjoy it. I'll be back soon with some brand new content, so stay tuned, and I'll see you guys in the next one.